Well, thank you everyone that's taken time to click on and view this 2021 PAC report for Coastal R&E. This PAC report will cover the livestock events and things that were conducted within the Southeast District as it pertains to research and extension. My name is Daniel Rivera, and I am the scientist over at the White Sand Branch Beef Unit. Brad Jones, the extension agent over in Stone County, collaborated with me on this, and together we came up with this report that hopefully will suffice as far as getting information to everyone. Unfortunately, due to COVID restrictions, we can't meet in person and have the discussions that we typically do, but I hope this serves as an adequate substitute. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I'm going to touch on right now is the research that we conducted at the White Sand Branch Unit over the last year. Like a lot of other places, COVID did impact some of our research output, but nonetheless, I still think we were pretty productive. We had a couple of graduate students that were working on some projects there, and I'm going to share some of that data with you guys now. Lakin Gulker is a student working on a Masters of Ag program, and Ty Jones is an extension agent who's working on his PhD. So Ty's interest, his study involved looking at castration methods and ways to mitigate stress and actually get a determination of which method is the most stressful, which method results in the most production loss, which is the better method, so to speak. So what we did with this project was we looked at 400 to 600 pound calves that would either be banded or surgically castrated. We looked at performance over a 42-day period and haptoglobin response in these animals. Understand that these types of animals are usually bought very inexpensively, so that makes them very attractive to feed yards and stocker operations. Unfortunately, they come with their own unique bag of problems, and one of which is that many of the males are left intact. So this is a legitimate problem that many feed yards and stocker operators do have to contend with all the time. So Ty's study, like I said, we either surgically cut them with an emasculator, and the way we did that was we cut off about a third, the bottom third of the scrotum, exposed the testes, and each one of the testes was removed with the emasculator, which crimped and cut at the same time on the cord. So once the testes were removed, the emasculator hopefully crimped it and cut it, crimped those vessels so that there would be minimal blood loss. The second method would be the calicrate bander, and these are probably the two most widely used methods. The bander essentially will have that rubber band that you see pictured there. You put it up on the outside of the testicles, up around the cord, and you tighten it down until essentially what you end up doing is cutting off blood supply to the testicles, and they'll eventually become necrotic and slough off. It's debated as to which method is preferred. From an aesthetics perspective, the bander would probably be a preferred method. Unfortunately, sometimes with mishaps on the bands, the animals may not be fully castrated, whereas with the surgical castration, you do know that you physically remove those testicles. So the question that we had is to which method impacted performance the worst, and how quick was the recovery from each specific method. So Ty measured haptoglobin in the blood, and what we saw was that the surgically castrated animals had a greater increase, which we would expect because that's an indicator of a physical trauma or an injury. So even at day 7, we still saw some increased levels there. Unfortunately, we didn't take it out any further to see if those levels declined. we've got some follow-up projects that we're going to be looking at that specific question. But what we did find that was unique was our weight change differences. Now let me orient you to this graph real quickly. This graph on the bottom are the various days that we took body weights, day 0, 7, 14, 21, all the way to 42. And on the left side is the animal's body weight. Because Ty was presenting this in a scientific meeting, the values are in the metric unit, so simply multiply those values by 2, and that'll give you a pretty close approximation to the body weight. So these animals started roughly over 500 pounds on day 0, probably like 525 pounds, but you see by day 7, the animals that were surgically castrated had a greater weight loss. And we attribute that to the physical trauma of the surgical castration. It's kind of a blunt force trauma. Those animals responded accordingly, like we would expect. They lost a lot of weight, and in fact, more so than the banded animals. But what was surprising with us is that we began to see some of that weight loss recover by day 14, day 21, and by day 28, they had recovered more weight than the banded animals. So if you look at the graph of the banded animals on the blue line, we see that response wasn't quite as traumatic as the surgical, but you didn't seem to get that rapid recovery. In fact, that rapid recovery seemed to be delayed about 7 to 10 days compared to the surgically castrated animals. So the long story short is that by the end of the 42-day period, both groups had recovered their initial body weight and indeed had surpassed that to where they were similar in body weight at the end of the study. However, during the study, there were differences in body weight, especially at day 7 and at day 28. This tells us that if you are trying to flip some cattle around really quickly or get them straightened out in a 28-day period, you might be better served to surgically castrate those males as opposed to banding them, because while banding may not result in that initial shock or that initial loss of body weight, it seems to be more of a chronic response that kind of lingers on until about day 28 or day 35, after which it begins to really take off again, and you get that recovery period. So further work is being done looking at some other methods that we can add to the banding. It's been suggested by several producers that if we also split the scrotum at the time of banding, that increases or improves the response to banding. And we found a study done up at Kansas that essentially illustrated that. So we're going to try and take this a little further and examine that effect next. So hopefully we will be conducting this study at the White Sand Unit February-March timeframe. And Ty will be able to report something to you next year. Now, Lakin, as a Master of Ag student, and her professional project was going to be looking at the direct-fed beef study that we conducted this past summer. Now, many of you all recall that in April, May, when COVID, that initial surge of COVID cases was evident, that many packing plants had to shut down because of sickness rates within the plants among the employees, and that led to a variety of disruptions in the cattle market. So if you all recall, there was a decrease in the value of these animals in the spring, and a lot of people that were pulling cattle off of ryegrass at that time kind of got shocked with that, because the value that they had calculated for their animals was no longer there. And that led to a lot of concern and people deciding that perhaps they just needed to hold those animals a little longer to try and get past this period of time when COVID would be an issue. At the same time, we started to see some shortages of beef in retail outlets. If you all recall, there's many an instance where the meat shelves were empty or they just had some ground beef packages. So that coupled with the decrease in value of those feeder calves had a lot of people start thinking that maybe we should just feed our own animals, and we may not be able to recapture the full value of this calf selling it in May, but if we feed it out, maybe we can at least put some meat away, put some beef away for to mitigate some of these shortages, or on the flip side of that, perhaps market that to other consumers that are concerned about beef availability. So one of the problems that we had with this is that Mississippi is traditionally not a state in which cattle are fed out, so we needed to look at the value of feeding these animals ourselves, how much it would cost, what type of performance we could expect, and we needed to do it within the constraints of what many of our producers have to operate in. So we had to work with all that in mind when we put this project together. So what we did was we looked at 3 treatments. We did a complete ration, which consisted of corn, soy hulls, protein pellets, gin motes, and minerals. And this was fed ad lib. It should be noted that this would not be considered a typical feedlot finishing ration, in that it was not as high in energy as you would find in a feedlot ration. One of the problems with feedlot rations is that while they're high in energy, that energy comes from starches. Now, if you push the envelope, so to speak, and really make a ration that's high in energy because of the high starches, you're also running the risk of a ration that could cause acidosis and could cause either subclinical responses or full-blown death. Unfortunately, because many producers around here don't have experience in feeding out animals on these really high energy rations, and because of some of the constraints that we have with regards to weather, feed availability, things of that nature, we decided to go with a very safe ration, which is going to be higher in fiber and lower in energy. But this is a ration that can be fed pretty easily without requiring a high level of management. The second treatment was a soy hull limited ration, and this was a diet that was made up of about 60% soy hulls, 35% protein pellet, and minerals fed at a limited amount at about 1.9% of their body weight on a dry matter basis. Now this was done because we felt that a producer could easily mix soy hulls in a protein pellet and then feed it at a limited basis. In this study, we are providing the concentrate in the form of the soy hulls and the protein, and the animal is making up the remainder of its diet by grazing pasture. The pasture would serve as its roughage source. Second treatment was done with corn, but it was essentially the same ration as we did with soy hulls, but we used corn instead of soy hulls. Again, looking at the fact that a producer could easily mix these 2 ingredients, they're readily available, and they could just be limit fed at a certain percentage of their body weight while allowing the animal to make up the remaining part of its daily intake through the available forage. So since this was done in the summer, the corn and soy hull groups got their forage from the warm season perennial pastures that we had on site, which would be Bahia grass, Bermuda grass mixes. This is a really busy slide, so let me give you a second to orient yourself to it. So this has all the data and some of the economics of feeding these animals at home, so to speak. These animals finished out at about 1,250 pounds on average, I would say. They were fed out for approximately about 150 days. The first group was 134 days, and they shipped out in October. The second group in early December at 177 days. It should be noted that we were operating a little bit under some constraints of what space was available at the meat lab at the time. And I would suggest that you keep that in mind if you're doing this at home, because many of the local commercial plants would be under the same types of constraints. In fact, I recall talking with people in May and June saying that the plants were booked until October before you could get anything in there to kill. So those constraints are real. And again, too, that's another footnote that you need to keep in mind when you're trying to do this at home. So now that I've gone off on that tangent, let's look at some of the data. Feed intake, as we expected, the ad lib group consumed more than the two limited groups. Average daily gain was similar, a little bit better for the ration group. Again, many of you that have fed cattle out, if you fed cattle out in the feedlots before, you'll see that daily gain is probably not what you saw in a commercial yard. But again, we're attributing that to the low energy density of that ration. But I felt that it was the safer option to go in that it could be fed without intensive management. Feed to gain ratio was lower for the limited groups compared to the ad lib group, and that's been proven before in other studies feeding cattle out, that if you limit feed them, you can probably get a little bit of an increase in your feed efficiency. Cost of gain was similar when we look at the overall what it cost us to put on a pound of gain. The ration cost per animal was greater, probably the fact that they consume more feed. Overall, I don't think there was much difference that I recall between the cost of the ration per ton, maybe a little bit more for the complete ration, but the fact that they were also fed more contributed to that overall feed cost per animal. So what this tells us is that with these different scenarios, it's going to cost anywhere from $250 to $300 per head to get that animal finished. So again, if you're trying to do this at home and you need to have an idea of what it might cost you, that's our feed cost. Now, again, that doesn't take into account labor, that somebody had to be there daily to ensure these animals got fed. And keep in mind too that those were the costs that we were seeing over the summer. Again, the supply disruptions also resulted in some lower feed costs than we would typically see throughout the year. But those were the values that we had based on the ingredients and the components that we were buying over the summer. Carcass weight was greater for the ration cattle than for the corn and soy limited diets, and so we got a heavier carcass. And many of you that take these and feed these animals out sometimes are surprised by the carcass weights, that a 743 pound carcass came off of a almost 1,300 pound heifer. That's about right. So keep in mind that that's just the hanging carcass weight. After further processing, once it gets broken down into the various steaks and hamburger meat and other cuts that you're getting, you're probably looking at another 150, 200 pound loss. So oftentimes producers are surprised that 1,200 pound animal yielded about 500 to 600 pounds of edible product. And unfortunately, that's about right. By the time you take out the bone and anything that's unedible, you're looking at about that amount of meat. But we still don't have all those cutout data yet. I'm hoping we can get that before the end of the spring semester so that Lakin can complete her professional paper. But initially, when we looked at the initial value of the animal, I talked to Josh Maples over at Ag Econ, and he gave us these values of what 875, 900 pound heifer would be worth in June when we started the study. And then we added on the feeding costs, because that's the actual value of the animal. So the total value of those fed animals was around anywhere from $1,050 to $1,100. So that's the value of that fed animal. And when we break it down on a carcass weight basis, we're coming back on that carcass to about 147 to to 150 per pound of carcass. Now, you break it down even further, I think that's going to come out to somewhere around $3 a pound for the meat that you get. So again, we're waiting on that carcass breakdown data so we can have a better idea of what it's costing us to feed this animal completely out. Also, keep in mind this doesn't take into account transportation to the slaughter facility, nor does it take into account any kind of slaughter and processing fees that might be added to your animal. But I think as far as getting an idea of what it might cost and how much feed it's going to take, this study does a good job in illustrating that. And once you figure out how much feed it's going to take, and you can make your own calculations and determine what it would cost you. So hopefully this study will serve some good for people, especially as they move forward trying to make some decisions with regards to how they want to manage this. So Lakin's going to be wrapping this up. I think she's already submitted this to a cattleman's article in the Mississippi Cattleman's magazine. So hopefully we'll get more data and she can finish it out before the summer gets here. So that wrapped up our research projects that we did at the station, extension programs that we did. We did 2 Zoom meetings regarding beef cattle nutrition. One was the basics of nutrition for the agents. And then we did a follow-up once we started this project about the potential of feeding cattle at home. Should be noted that a lot of the data that we presented in that follow-up were data that Brandy and I had to essentially calculate. And that's why this project to us is so important, because it actually gives us some numbers that we can use. Dr. Lemus hosted a fall producer meeting for forage and hay production that I was a part of. And then in a joint effort with Ag Econ and Central R&E, we did the economics of hay production this past winter. I know Jeff Johnson and Josh had been doing this a couple times in the fall as well. And I know Brett has done some really great pasture walk videos that I think if you get a chance to look at, they're really helpful. So right now, where we are with what we're doing, Ty has started his second castration study. And we are currently doing a cow supplementation project to see what we can do to program feed these animals based upon hay analysis rather than just put some feed out as we feel they need it. We're trying to look at the overall cost, economics, and animal performance. And then we're doing a final FDA clearance project that we've been working on with the pharmaceutical company for the last 7 years or so. Another note, and I don't know, a good way to wrap this up is that I'll be leaving Mississippi State for the University of Arkansas in May. On January 15th, it's been 10 years here. It's been a good 10 years. I've learned a lot from the producers and learned a lot from the agents. I trust that Mississippi State's in good hands with the current group of agents that we've got and the programs and studies that we've got going forward. So it's bittersweet. I'm looking forward to being up at Arkansas, but I will miss things that I've come to cherish about Mississippi. So with that, I'll wrap up the research component of what we've been doing within the region as far as our PAC report. Thank you. And you've got me again. So now I've taken off the researcher hat, and I'm gonna go over stuff that Brad and I, primarily Brad put all this together. I'm just the mouthpiece. So first of all, I want to thank him for getting me all this information so we could have something to put together for you guys. But to offset some of these issues that COVID has set up for us with our meetings, both BQA and private applicator have been moved online so that producers can still have access to it and maintain their certifications. So if you have any questions on that, I would suggest talking to the local extension agent. The home place board sale that's been conducted now, I think, well over 10 years. I know they were doing it before I got here, so at least 12 or 13 years. This year, extension personnel assisted producers in commingling 13 loads of cattle for August, November delivery. This has always been a really great program, in my opinion. It really illustrates the benefit and the value of preconditioning your cattle and getting them ready to go to the feed yard. A lot of the problems that we talked about earlier with Ty's study as far as castrating these animals and some of those management issues that have to be done at the feed yard. If you can do it back at home when the animal's a little bit smaller and it's less stressful, and you can allow that animal to recover, that adds value to that animal. And this year they showed that going this route averaged $5 over cash markets for the weeks when the cattle were sold. So feed yards out there do see the value in this, and this is a great avenue to help producers get involved and start learning how to go about the preconditioning process and what they need to do, and hopefully helps them capture some added revenue to their animals, especially the ones that are going above and beyond and preparing those animals for the next phase of production. So statewide information from an extension perspective. Dr. Leila Rios de Alvarez has started in December on campus. She is our new small ruminant specialist. She comes to us from Colombia, and we are looking forward to working with her as far as our various programs. I think she's a great addition, and I think the future looks bright for small ruminants and here in Mississippi. Additionally, Dr. Michael Posado is a new veterinarian at the vet school. Again, too, another small ruminant person. He has an interest in reproduction and parasite management. And both of the links to their press announcements and their backgrounds and their bios are here. So just feel free to click on the link and you'll be taken to the various websites. So on another note, Dr. Blanton, John Blanton, who many of you all know is the department head for Mississippi, the Animal and Dairy Sciences at Mississippi State, will be leaving on February 1. He plans to start at Purdue as the department head over there. I think Dr. Blanton's been here about 8 or 9 years, and we will miss him. But Dr. Jane Parrish has agreed to step up and serve as the interim department head for ADS, and I know Jane will do a good job there. And no date has been set yet for when they're planning to start interviewing for the full-time department head in ADS. So as we know more, we'll keep people informed. And with that, that will wrap up my PAC report for this year. Again, it has been a pleasure to visit with you all every year. And I have truly appreciated the feedback and the comments that we've received. And hopefully you guys will treat the person that they replace me with, if you guys treat the person they replaced me with half as well as you treated me, then that person will be treated extremely well. So again, I want to thank you all for everything that you've done for us at the experiment station. And with that, take care.